Hi, this is Natu, a guy who's way too old and way too long involved in this game, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel.
Right, this is going to be another episode of Reflections, and my guest for this one is Natu, aka Joona Leppänen, who is the Marketing Director and co-founder of ENCE, but is also a very veteran Counter-Strike player, and that's obviously what the first part of this interview will be about. So I'm going to be about ENCE. There is no ENCE for the first, 12 years of this story, so we go all the way back. And I will say, you have a baby face. You actually look the same, but just slightly smaller. You looked almost the same when I met you. But people don't know, because obviously now you're a veteran of the scene, you actually had a similar position to me when you came into Counter-Strike natu. We were the young noobs. At the time, a lot of players were like 25 or 23. We were like the youngsters. Weren't you like a teenager when you got into CS?
Yeah. I mean, online gaming in general, I got into like late 90s. I played Quake when I was like 13 or something, right? And Counter-Strike came out when I was 15. So yeah, I actually remember like in the early years, I wasn't eligible for a tournament because I was only 16 years old. So yeah, for sure, I was a little boy at the time.
Right, one of the first big tournaments for you was obviously the very first World Cyber Games, where it's sort of like an Olympic style thing. You had to have all the different countries had to have their each own team, and you got to join because obviously you're Finnish. You played in the Finnish team All Stars, which people won't know. Someone I'll ask about in a minute. myssE, the famous player who was in Game Online and other teams like that. But actually, if people don't know, this team before that was the one where, if you remember earlier, it had been like a mixed, like it was like half Swedish, half Danish or something before that. So was it something like, was it myssE got control of the team and then he made it a Finnish lineup? How did you come to join this team?
Yeah, I think so. It was myssE who all knew the owner of All Stars. From what I can gather, it was like some rich guy from Sweden who was just running a team, basically. They had some Quake players, and I think the Quake player had a good relationship with this guy, and then also knew myssE through something. And then he had a couple of buddies, this guy called Scratch, who was a good friend of his, who was also part of the team. And they started like putting it together. And that's how I got involved into it at the time.
As I say, you got to go to the first World Cyber Games, and I want to set the table here for people who don't understand that even though this particular year is actually quite famous that it clashed with the CPL, so basically anyone who could go to the CPL went there because the prize money was even more. It was the CPL, which is already established. But then everyone else who didn't go to that bit, you went to this, so it was still a good tournament. It just wasn't maybe like all the best teams. But the part I want to sort of reiterate at the beginning, Natu, is the reason this event had a unique charm when people went is because the difference is, the famous line we used to say about the big CPLs in Americas, they were the World Championship, but you also were sort of in the basement ballroom of just a 3-star hotel. The difference is, give me a sense, when you go to this event and it's in South Korea, wasn't it sort of like the Olympics? It was almost like some crazy scale, right?
Yeah, I know it for sure. Especially being like the first kind of event. Like before that, the biggest event I went to was like in a gymnastics hall, right? And then all of a sudden you're playing an event that's taking place in a massive mall. I think it's called the COX or COX.
Yeah.
One or the other. It's a massive mall. And also we were residing in like this Samsung campus kind of a thing. So it had like this whole Olympic vibe to it for sure. Like we were somewhere in the outskirts of Seoul. And I mean, I've never been to the Olympics myself, but I can imagine it was pretty much like in a similar vein. And yeah, you were representing your own country in those events, and they had practice facilities. It was actually pretty far ahead at that time if you compare it to anything. For the next 10 years, like they had practice facilities where we could practice and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, for sure, it was like definitely felt like you were important.
Just a random detail, because I did look this up when I was like refreshing my memory. But in this tournament, in the group stage, you randomly lost to a team from Malaysia, even though aside from that, you topped the group and you got out. Like, I didn't even know Malaysia played CS, mate. Like, was that just a random match or something?
I can't remember. I'll be honest with you, I can't remember. But now that you say it, I think, yeah. I mean, it must have been one of those cases where, how we still have the different kind of ways to play Counter-Strike in different regions. It must have been even a bigger culture shock to play against a Malaysian team in 2001 when you had like zero way to even like do any kind of research on how they play. So I'm guessing it was one of those cases where we just, the way they played just caught us off guard, and best of 1 games at the time. I can't remember what was the format. Was it MR12?
Yeah, it would have been back then. Yep.
Yeah, or even probably not CO rules. But it was MR12, yeah, for sure. So I mean, as we know, it's very cutthroat format. So a couple of mishaps, even like back then, the Counter-Strike economy and everything was, let's just say it was very interesting. So yeah, one of those cases, I'm assuming.
Right. One of the things in this tournament, like you're saying, though, this is why I also set it up, is because this is what people have to understand is different from now. Even if, for example, as I'm recording this, the Mongols is doing great at IEM Cologne, you can't really say, like, we didn't know who they are because they've been at every event for the last, like, 3 years or something. Like, by now, we all sort of know who all the countries are, who the top teams are, and it's more just like how good you are, how much prep you do. But at this tournament, like, one of the teams you lost to, for example, was actually the team from Canada that had Steel, not the one who does as stuff now, but the Canadian one from Bulgaria originally. And so I'd imagine, like, you couldn't have known who these people were at the time. You could have never played them, and you just have to play them in a match on stage. So you guys end up finishing third. Was that an interesting aspect, the fact that you essentially know almost none of the teams except European ones you know?
Yeah, I mean, we got to know a lot of the players at these tournaments. I mean, because social media wasn't a thing at the time. I think we were on even different IRC servers. The North Americans were on their own, and the Europeans were on their own. So we didn't even interact too much. But I think that's where it started, where we started interacting more with players from different regions. And yeah, for sure, we had zero clue on any of the guys. We could only because we had some screaming opportunities there with the practice computers. We got to try to play against some of the other countries that we didn't get to play on the regular, and that's when we knew that okay, these guys could definitely hang. They can play, and even back then, I think a lot of guys from the old school days would agree that the North Americans, especially, they were individually very, very skilled.
Yes.
Not necessarily very good team play wise, but that they could just bang a lot of headshots and do just insane plays. And I think probably the reason why we lost to them as well.
What was it like then to actually, like we were saying, you didn't just get to get the prize money and come third at a big event. You get to get bronze medals and have the whole ceremony and stuff. That must be cool.
Yeah, and it's like a fun fact. My bronze medal from the WCG 2001 right now is in the Finnish Sports Museum. I donated a lot of my old stuff there because they was just collecting dust in boxes. So I felt like, rather give it to the museum for people to see. But yeah, I mean, of course, it was the first. I think we won like $10,000 or something for the third place. So that was the first time to even get any significant kind of money from playing Counter-Strike. And I believe to this date that experience of going to WCG 2001 was the fact that kind of inspired me to have this whole career that I've had in esports altogether, because I could already tell back then that how well everything was ran for the standards of that time. And you could see how popular all the StarCraft player, or was it StarCraft or Warcraft? I can't remember which one was played at the time. Yeah, Brood War was played, yeah. How massive following those guys had in Korea. It was insanity. We were nobodies compared to those guys, right? And they had just flocks of fans following them around. So that kind of really made a big impression in my head, and kind of gave me the foresight of, okay, this could actually be something, down the line.
One of the interesting things about this area is because obviously there's no salaries and the scene's very, very small and there's limited space to go to events. Back then, I would say to people, you have to think of it more like if you just went and you were a 15-year-old and you made a ice hockey team or a football team or a floorball team. It's more just who you know. You play with people you know, people who think you're good, and that's how you get invites. It wasn't like now with salaries and transfers and everyone's looking at rate. There was no stats even back then. So after this, I remember I came to an event in Norway called CPL Oslo, and you went with a team called Pro Gaming, and it was you and Robin from All Stars, but these other guys were actually sort of it was their first time sort of being a good team. I think they were just an online team or something. And even though I remember in this tournament you didn't do very well, although I will say this is actually one of my first experiences after that event with Finns and drinking vodka, and all I can say is what I can remember was fun. It was good, but so maybe getting eliminated was good in that sense. But this was an example of where wasn't this where you were just kind of trying to form a new team or get in with a new crowd or something?
Yeah, I think there was a couple. I think myssE went to Game Online around that time, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so. Or Sports United or something, one of the two.
Yeah, he moved to Sweden, essentially to his then girlfriend. And I think it was time for me to kind of try to find something. And me and Robin have been playing for a while together and felt like, okay, let's try to piece something together. And I had been going to these different LANs here in Finland and meeting up with people. I was always super social. I think that was one of the reasons why I ended up in different teams as well. It's because I was always kind of socializing with people and getting to know them. because it was different back then. And this team had a lot of potential, but in a classic Finnish fashion, very good in online environment and in practice, but didn't have too much experience in playing on LAN. And I mean, not that many people really had that much experience when you think about it, but even more so, it felt like they struggled to kind of make the plays they would normally do. And so we gave it a whirl. Didn't work out too well from what I remember. I think we lost to like Mouse Sports at the time, cArn, those guys in this CPL, and perhaps someone else. But they were really, really good players. But in like Finnish players always, not always, but up until a couple of years later, most of them were just really good online, but just struggled to kind of convert that to a LAN environment.
Let me ask you about myssE then, because this is someone who was also really old school. I mean, he'd already been in the teams like Game Online that had been to the big American CPL. I've got two little stories here to give you a way in, to give me a sense of it, both as a player and as a person. Because as a player, the reason I always told people this guy is the definition of LAN player is because there's a piece of trivia you'll probably remember when I tell you that is utterly insane. Like, I even told him, like, even though that's a cool story, mate, that should be like, you shouldn't do it. That should just be in a movie or a comic book. You know that thing where everyone had their config at the time, of course, right? And everyone had all the settings. Remember, people bringing rulers to it. He famously, right, he thought that was like, that's just some like whack shit, like why is everyone messing with that? He used to just put exec config.exe or default, the default config. And if you don't know, that automatically makes your mouse sensitivity 3, right? And I tried explaining to him, but you do know though, miss, like that'll be different on each PC though. Like, what about the mouse drivers? And he just goes like, I'll figure it out. And essentially, as far as I know, he would exec that, use all the default binds, whatever sense this PC was set to. And his logic was, I'll just warm up for like 10 minutes and then I'll get the kills. He just didn't see the game as like something you had to do. And that's a real story, by the way. That's not a joke, guys. He was doing this at like CPL as far as I know. And then the other thing is, just to give you a sense of who he is as a person, because obviously a lot of Finns, people think of like the really quiet guys who were scared to speak English and stuff. Put it this way, not only was he like a shit talker back then, Natu, he's one of the few people who every now and then, in the last 10 years, when I'm doing all these events, would just like send me a Facebook DM and be like, tell all these fucking scrubs what it's all about. Like, oh, these pussies didn't hire for the event or whatever. I'm like, and also I want to, basically, even then he still had that same persona. So give me some thoughts on this guy. What are your favorite people, right?
One of my favorite teammates of all time. We still talk as well. I haven't seen him in a couple of years, I think, but typically I do. Like, he comes by to like the assembly events just to kind of meet up and we'll have lunch. I mean, a really good player for sure at the time. And that, just quick side note on the config stuff, actually, one of the reasons I think actually why the Finnish players were so good on online versus LAN was because they were freaking wizards when it comes to setting up your config. And we, because of WCG 2001 and the CPLs, because we used to only, like, we practiced against NiP before the CPL day one, the winter 2001, and we went to the WCG. That's when we got introduced to the CPL config, which was like basically the most default thing you could have. You had like, basically it was a rubbish config because you were playing with like worse network settings than you should have been playing. So you were at a disadvantage and sort of, but then once you got used to it, and especially when you got to LAN, you got a massive buff because everyone was on that config, right? So I think that's one of the reasons. But back to myssE. I mean, I think more so, I just remember one of the unique features, when I went to their house where he used to live with his parents. I just remember the first thing I saw when I went to his room was a hole in the wall. I was like, no, you had a tough time there, buddy. So, I had a bit of a tougher game the other night. But he was a hilarious guy. He could come up with the most random jokes, the perfect joke in any given situation. A great teammate. I think his only like kind of issue sometimes was that he was a bit too temperamental, so he would rage a bit too much in situations and not focus on the ball, or eye on the ball when he should have been the thing. But I think overall, for sure, like one of my all-time favorite teammates to play with.
When you say there, you got to practice against NiP, and people know it's one of like the best teams ever. Did they live up to the hype?
Oh, I think we won one map out of like
right.
20 or something. And the one, actually, fun story. The one map we won was, I actually remember this. It was Cobble, and we beat them pretty bad on Cobble. And Vestland got so pissed off, he just left the boot camp. And then I remember Potty came to our room, and he was like, "Yeah, that's Vestland. He's a bit unique." So I think we're going to have to cancel the rest of the day's practice because they lost one map against us. But hey, that was the best ever practice because like those guys were like Media and Heat and Potty. Like, geez, those guys were insane. Like the way I'm sure for them it wasn't great practice because they were spanking our asses. But for us, it was perfect because like we learned our like the hard way that we have a long ways to go in this game. So I think it was a good prep for WCG.
I always thought back then, one of the things, even though we didn't have stats and even demos initially, one of the things that was kind of cool, or rather like maybe HLTV servers or something, one of the things I always thought was cool was one, because so many people, I mean, almost everyone played online, you could immediately see who the LAN players are. And in fact, I always talk about this with the old school players. Almost no one had a team of 5 LAN players. Almost everyone, you'd get to the LAN and go, he's only good online, fuck. Like, but you couldn't know that till he got there, and you were just there then, you just play. But the other aspect that sort of was interesting similarly was because the game, if people remember the early versions, was like a little bit more skill heavy, like you could sort of be like a one-man carry. It also meant if you were like the bit like a Potty or something, or like some of the top players, you also could see that. You could see that these guys, they weren't just like another player in the team. They were just like fucking titans walking around the server killing everyone, right?
Yeah, no, we actually came up with a game of, it was called the game of Potty, which is like everyone goes 1-by-1, 1-on-5, see if they can win a round. Because that's how good he was, for example. Like he was insane when it came to clutch. Median, I remember I thought he was the best player in the world for me at that time. Like just absolute insanity. Like he would be 1-on-4 and it would be like nothing. Of course, like we were not as smart on how we do our peaks or, things of that nature, the meta of the game, all that kind of stuff and the micro stuff. But still like the individual skill they would have is just, it was on a different level. I don't even know how they managed to get that good.
One of the teams not that long after this, the next year, that's obviously a big deal for you because it's actually how you got your career really going, was obviously Destination Skyline, one of your best teams ever. And the cool thing about this team was you had like famously Tico was in Okrana, if people remember. He was that really small guy who never talked, but he was really good at the game, basically. There was loads of people back then who were little demons at the game and you just knew were wizards, etc. And then in this team, actually, most of the other players hadn't been top players. It was kind of like a squad that you somehow put together. But this team became really good. It became like one of the consistently best teams, right? Can you give me some thoughts on this squad?
Yeah, I think the most ridiculous name of this team before we became Destination Skyline was Liquid Ice. And I don't know, I can't remember.
That is a bad name. That is one.
Imagine that in today having a team called Liquid Ice. Someone take it up and make one. But yeah, I remember like there for whatever reason, there was some animosity between like top players in Finland. Like players from the teams that I played for prior were not really getting along online with the guys that were playing Okrana. And that kind of vibe was going across in different teams. And then one day, I think it was Alpha who messaged me on IRC or something that, hey, we're trying to put together the best possible Finnish lineup, basically. Like all the past aside, all the shit talking aside, let's try to make the best possible team. And at the time, I was playing with a local team, like from my hometown, with a bunch of my buddies. Also a genius name called Lahti Esports. And I think we were in a Danish organization called Iron Zion or something for a little while. Organization, into obviously not what you can imagine in today's standards. And it was a tough call for me, but I actually spoke with them open, like, hey, I got this invitation. And they were all like, yeah, of course you gotta take the opportunity. And so it became reality. And early on already when we started playing together, you could tell like, okay, now we're cooking. Like we got a really, really good lineup. I think we had some sort of concerns on a couple of the players and how they would perform on LAN. I remember like Melvin, for example, as a guy. There's still a spot on train called Melvin in Finnish Counter-Strike in today.
He's pretty hyped, right?
So, yeah. But he was always a player that we were kind of thinking, how is he going to perform on LAN? But then we went to a tournament, I think in Latvia or something, where we won. Played against, was it Neo or Taz or both of them?
Yeah,
Pentagram. And then we could tell, okay, he can definitely play on LAN as well. And then I think those baby steps kind of built our confidence, and we could tell, okay, this is a team where we can actually like be very competitive on the international scene, because Finnish teams hadn't really done anything aside from that WCG run we had in 2001.
One thing I did notice about this, because obviously this isn't about the match, this is more the experiences. You went to the dreaded CyberX games, which if people don't know, I have to tell the backstory to this. This is when a big tournament was announced. It was going to have the most prize money ever. I think it was like 100,000 first or something crazy. And it was scheduled like a week or 2 weeks after the CPL. So the funniest thing is, even though history remembers the CPL was the big championship, actually a lot of teams sort of were going to go to both, and they went to that one first. You guys just went to this one. And when you went there, famously, it's the one where there just wasn't an event, right? Wasn't it just something mad? Like you get there and there's just like the tournament never happens and people claim there's like people stealing PCs. Give me some thoughts on this. It sounds mental, mate. It was in Vegas, right?
Yeah, I mean, we traveled like 20 something hours. I remember like we had some kind of a 6-7 hour layover in New York. We were walking down in Queens trying to source some food. Went to the most ghetto Burger King I've ever been to. Scared for my life, basically. First time in the US, I believe, for me as well. And then, we got to Vegas, got to the event. It looked okay in the beginning, like everything was going to work out. They had everything set up. But that was the time when Steam just came out, like just prior. Yes. And we started playing 1.6 instead of 1.5. And I think they ended up having some very, very big issues with Steam connections, which caused the servers to lag like massively. So we actually started our first game in that tournament. I think we managed to play we were like 4-0 up or something against a French team called Good Game. And then it just got paused because it was just kept lagging all the time. And we never got to resume the game. And I don't know the exact reasons why they didn't manage to fix any of it. But then the next day we were told the tournament is off, but we're going to be holding these 10K show matches. And we had been paired up with Swedish team called
Experience. You had cArn and DSN's team.
Yeah. So we're like, okay, whatever. Let's just do it. Let's play the game. We won the game. Spoiler alert, never got any of the money, of course. And then, afterwards, way back after, hearing stories about people stealing money and running away somewhere. And I can't remember all the details, but it was a mess.
Along those lines, actually, the funny thing about this year is, even though your team was a very good team, in the different squads cArn and DSN were in, they were in this team, then it was Gamers.nu, then it was Big Rip. But remember, with different teammates, you guys would always face them. It was like a back and forth rivalry. And so, if people don't know, this is 2003, 4 guys. cArn doesn't become famous till like 2006, with Forrest and fucking Tentpole and all those guys. So, give me some thoughts of like early cArn and DSN. What was it like to battle these guys on the way up?
I think they were also kind of known as onliners, if I remember correctly. And we fought them a bunch of times that year for sure. I think the first one was maybe aside from this scam show match, was in Latvia in this tournament where they were Gamers.nu. I remember we were always close games, good games to play against them. And then eventually, actually, fun fact from that same year, Game Goon tournament was like a CPL qualifier.
Yep.
We already had tickets and everything paid for to go to Dallas, but we still wanted to go to Game Goon to get our reps up and get some, LAN games going. But if we would have won the tournament, we would have kind of got an extra tickets, right? So we were going to be playing as Gamers.nu, and it was. So the games were best of 1, but I think it was like they had to beat us twice in a best of 1 for them to win.
Yes.
Win us in the finals, and we were so overconfident. We were already thinking, okay, who are we going to sell the tickets to? And we lost to them twice in a best of 1 on Dust 2 or something along those lines. So no, they were already good, but I think we expected for us to win. We expected to be better. I don't think we really gave them too much respect at the time. I think that was maybe the first time where we had to kind of recognize that they were really, really good at Counter-Strike as well. And it still took a couple of years for them to really, really pop off. I think they went on to DSM went on to make the first Fnatic team and stuff.
Yes.
Didn't do too well, but took a while for them to really, really get everything going.
By the way, that is going to be a theme of not just your career, but Finnish CS, if people don't know. There are so many stories where if you only watched the game in the HLTV demo, you'll never know why this team lost and why they were leading. There are so many stories where it goes like, oh, we're winning, lads, lol, buy like, I don't know, paras or whatever it is, or like people just going like, hey, should we swap mouse to skit? People just doing the most ridiculous thing, like almost like something out of a comedy movie or something. Why in Finnish CS is this weird thing where it's almost like wacky races. When people are about to win, they just blow it at the finish line, if you know what I mean?
I don't know. That's a very, very good question. If I had the answer, I would have been much more successful in my Counter-Strike career.
Do you agree, though? Do you think that was kind of the trend? It was a weird vibe, right?
No, yeah, for 100% correct there. I mean, a couple of good examples you mentioned already. The swapping the mouses. We lost to the British team. I can't remember what they were called.
Brick.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we lost to them in the opening game of the Samsung Euro Championships in 2006 or 7.
Yeah.
Went on to be, I think we made it to like third or something, but made our lives a lot harder because we lost that first game. It was Nasu and Conte who thought it was a fun idea to swap mouses for some reason. Then there was the notorious quarter-final at an ESWC in 2007 where I think it was Conte or something. We got like, I think we were 12-3 up after T-side nuke, which is obviously insane for T-half.
It should be impossible to lose the game, basically.
It wasn't. Yeah, it should have been impossible to lose the game. And then what happens is like Conte and Ruid and those guys are playing shotguns, which were not viable in 1.6 yard of nuke. The worst possible combination. Had it at least been like ramp, then you can let it slide maybe. But they were holding yard with shotguns. We ended up losing. We let it slide, and then it was over. We lost the second map. I think it was Mirage, quite convincingly because everyone was just tilted. But yeah, I mean, in the big picture, that was, I think, one of the plagues of the Finnish Counter-Strike was attitude. I always felt like I was even asking myself, like, am I too serious? Like, what's going on? Because these people are just literally fucking around. And in the most important situations, like, did they not take it as serious as I did? Probably some of them didn't, or they just didn't have the, I don't know, some sort of like a mental capacity to like hold it together through and through. But yeah, 100%, it was a thing that kept on happening in different phases of my career as well with Finnish players.
As you say, you did go to this tournament in Latvia, the Intel Cybersport Cup that you won. And it was a tournament where, if people don't know, it wasn't like the biggest teams. It was some like good teams. It was M19 that had won World Cyber Games a few years earlier. There was cArn and DSN's team. There was the Poles, like you say. It wasn't the Golden Five yet, obviously, but it was like a good team. These are quality teams. But to me, the interesting detail is, at the time, a lot of the top teams did just sit there, and if they had the sponsor, wait for the big CPL or the World Cyber Games, and then it's like you go ham for that. Your team, what was cool, I always thought, was you were trying to also like go to the medium-sized events and earn money and just win the prize money, even if it was just 5,000 euros or something. I mean, this one, obviously, it's not that far from Finland. It's kind of a cool angle, though, because I do think back then, Natu, a lot of big teams were almost like scared to get exposed if they went to the smaller land, because then basically, some would say you can only lose if you're the big name, right? If you don't finish first, everyone's going to be like, what the fuck happened? So, give me some thoughts about this. You guys tried to play the whole circuit, right?
Yeah. I mean, I remember like D-Sky had, I think, Samsung as like the main sponsor. So we had some budget. Like, of course, we didn't get salaries, but we had money to like go to these tournaments, and they kept popping up in countries nearby where, as you say, it's not a long travel. It's not that expensive to go to these tournaments, and also to keep ourselves kind of in the rhythm of playing these LAN games, because we felt like if we don't go to the tournaments, like if we don't play LAN games more than 2 times every 6 months, it's evidently not going to be good for you. And we felt the momentum as well. I mean, we were doing good, and we saw an opportunity in each of these tournaments to grab the main prize, make some money. So I think it was a combination of those things that made us. I can't remember why other teams weren't doing. Maybe it was what you were saying, that they were just kind of holding on to their strat books for CPLs.
One thing that's interesting is, even though as this story for this year emerges, this team's like a top 5 team by the end of the year and across the big events and competitive, etc. One of the interesting details is you didn't get to go to ESWC because obviously there was one spot for Finland, right? And famously, there was this really weird dynamic, which is the other team, which actually had digital at the time, was obviously the team called Astralis. Yes, not the Danish team from CSGO, people. I actually hate that team's Danish as well. If you don't know their little piece of trivia, I heard they originally tried to buy Spirit of Amiga, which would have been perfect. That was fucking Danish. But anyway, whatever. I let myself get triggered by that. This was a really different team. It's not the greatest team of all time. It was actually the most online team of all time. It was just a bunch of Finns who would come up. They were good players, by the way. I've watched all the POVs. They were good. You even played with them later. But there was this weird dynamic where if it was within Finland, they always beat you guys. But when they went to the international, they did fucking nothing. They bombed. Meanwhile, if you guys could go, you could actually like have a chance to come like top 4, top 3. So was it a strange dynamic to be losing to this team in the few times you'd beat them domestically?
I think it was why eventually we changed lineups as well. I would imagine, right? Because like we kept screwing up the qualifiers against them. I don't know what it was. I can't remember that far back. Like, what was it exactly that kept causing it? But I felt like we were maybe the more team play, by the book kind of a team, and they were kind of the gung ho, random, typical Finnish Counter-Strike team. We just, for whatever reason, even though we played it multiple times, we just couldn't get the hang of it. How do we play against this? And someone would always have a massive game from them as well. So the combination of those things, I think, was the reason why we just kept losing these qualifiers. And yeah, it was weird. Like, I mean, I hope they would be doing good, but every time, I mean, back then we were lucky to be able to even watch on HLTV, but then you watch the match spots on IRC to see how they were doing in these tournaments, and they were not doing great. But yeah, like I mentioned, then I'm pretty sure like that was one of the reasons why we eventually decided to kind of mix things up a bit as well.
Yes. By the way, one thing to set the scene, and actually I did an episode on my channel called Strapbook with Alexi B, where I was actually trying to ask him what the early CSGO scene was like in Finland. And I compared it by telling him some of these stories about what it was like Finnish players back in the day, because obviously I knew you and all the other people, etc. And what's funny is, apparently it is quite different. And he actually, by the way, bear in mind he's the major champion now, he was almost just like loving sitting back like by the fireside listening to old stories. Like, oh, I love these old tales, what it's like. And so I'll give you an example of one. When you would be in a Finnish team back then, one of the things that's really weird is, another thing about the sort of fuck it attitude of Finnish people is they weren't the ones grinding all the time, in the server, dry running the strats, like all time. I mean, we didn't even have aim trainers, but I don't know, CSDM or whatever you had back then, or Publix. They weren't the guys who'd do that. What they would do is you'd play the scrims, and even then, by the way, we'll get to this later, top Finnish teams, probably the most notoriously bad scrim partners ever. Like, again, if you think they're doing that shit in an ESWC game, imagine what they do when they're bored in a fucking scrim game, guys. Like, these are the teams that get kicked out of the scrim channel for doing the shotguns and fucking knifing people. But anyway, what they would do is, after everyone finished the scrims, this is not even a troll, like almost like some like movie where, a guy's like a football star and then he goes down to the park and plays with the kids. You guys would just go on to like clan base where I could have signed up and played there. You'd go on a clan base, just make a mix of teams, like a random one that night, go on the ladder and basically just sort of happy gaming, just be playing and drinking light beers and stuff and just be fucking around all night. That was kind of the vibe back then, right? Even top pros did this.
Yeah, actually, to the contrary, I'll give you a fun fact. In I think that All Stars team in 2001, we were far ahead of the curve because we were doing theorizing before each practice day for quite a bit. When we were learning the tricks, it was a typical our in-game leader Scratch would go through stuff, and we would kind of. I mean, we didn't go down the mile or down the stretch of like writing things down and then kind of reminiscing on what we did wrong in the previous day's practice or anything, but it was mostly just off of our memory going through things and things we maybe screwed up and that kind of stuff. But generally speaking, you are correct. I mean, it was very interesting, and I felt like I was kind of an anomaly in the Finnish space because I don't know how much you remember from back in the heydays when you visited my place, how much I played and how much I really like put into it.
You were doing it every day, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I always played a ton of CS, and I always try to like improve myself as much as possible, like spending countless of hours during the night and on a 24-hour Dust 2 public server, just wrecking.
Dude, you were even playing, if it was at night, you would even like play with 120 ping to America just to get some pogs and play like a pickup game, right? On a ESCA.
Yeah. Yeah, I played Cal Open with like the complexity guys, like Warden and those guys, just because what the fuck not?
Okay.
So yeah, I was an addict. I was massively addicted to Counter-Strike, I should say.
Well, along those lines, though, let me ask you, if people don't know, you actually have a very unique life situation, because at the time, tragically, your parents had passed away, and you had a situation, though, where one thing you were able to inherit from them was you got an apartment. And so you had your own apartment in a city, and because you already own it, if people don't know, one of the interesting things about how it's done in Scandinavia is you don't really just like rent the place. Often you buy the place outright, and then you don't have to pay the rent. You've got it at that point. And it's quite cheap to, pay the utilities. Obviously, already internet's really cheap because it's Finland, it's got all the fiber everywhere, etc. And so the cool thing was, in a way, this was like a really good setup to be a pro gamer, right? You didn't have to go and do a job elsewhere. As long as you could make like just enough to get the rent and not the living costs, basically, right? Yeah. As long as you could get enough to live and keep the lights on and stuff, you had a bit of breathing room to be a pro, and there was no one to tell you what to do. You could just do what you wanted, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think Counter-Strike was for sure my savior. I mean, if it hadn't been a Counter-Strike, who knows what I would have been doing because of the circumstances I was in at the time. But yeah, for sure. I mean, I was a bit of a unicorn in that sense that my living situation kind of allowed me to put all these hours in. And then also, I mean, I'm a very, very competitive person all at the same time. When I put my mind into something, I really want to also perfect it. So I did spend too much time for some people, but for me, it was like the right amount of time. And it was enabled by the fact that I had those circumstances. I mean, obviously not the most fun circumstance, but at the same time, I mean, I made the best of it.
To me, though, that's part of why you're such a model pro, though, at the time, because being good at CS was a big part of your identity, right? That was kind of the way you could express yourself in the world.
Yeah, no, for sure. And in hindsight, when you think about it, it's all part of this journey that I've been on for 25 years, right? I mean, it's all been a build-up. Who knows what it'll end up being? But it's been steps. I mean, I feel privileged to have been a part of the pioneering age of Counter-Strike, of esports. I mean, so many things that I've long forgotten. There's no evidence of the things that happened, like outside of these kind of reflections interviews you do, that you can't really go back and look at these matches and things of that, which is a bit of a pity.
Yeah.
But in the big picture, I always have reminisced back into those days. It's like, it was so much fun because even though it would be cool to be today's pro and get all this professional help you can get, not only didn't we have coaches at the time, but now you have, performance coaches, psychologists, nutritionists, like all kinds of different resources. And that's the one thing I would imagine would be cool to kind of have as a gamer. But at the same time, it was so much fun at the time in a different society, in a different world altogether, to kind of be a part of that and kind of set the stone for what esports is today.
Let me ask about a few of the players in this team. So the funny thing is, one of the names that no one's going to remember, because sadly he never had a frag movie, he wasn't a giant name. Well, I actually always thought this guy was the best. It was the guy Coali in your team, because if you ever watched his demo, he was just a really well-rounded player, it seemed like. What do you think of this guy? Again, like a lot of players, if they don't have a big personality, you'll have to tell me, what was he like?
Funny guy. One of the, also like in the similar category with myssE, in the sense of how funny and kind of, he was the kind of guy that kept the team vibe really light in a good way, less of a rager compared to myssE. So in that sense, I guess personality was almost an upgrade, but also a very good player. And I think he came in as kind of a last minute fifth player, because if I'm not mistaken, Digital was supposed to be our fifth player for this liquidized team that then became the Destination Skyline. But then I think he ended up going to Experience, like the Swedish team. And we brought in coali because he and Alpha knew each other because they live in the same city. We tested him out, and it kind of felt like, okay, we're cooking. Things are working good. So a very, very good rifler, had massive multi-kill potential. Maybe he was his biggest nemesis himself, because he was a bit too harsh on himself always, right. Kind of expecting inhuman things from himself. So he kind of cut down on himself a bit too much, but for my money, an amazing player. Still, every now and again, actually, I've played with him a couple of times, right. In the last few years. So he's not too good anymore, though. It's pretty garbage.
20 years later, to be fair. It's allowed. It's allowed.
If I compare to myself,
right,
I play CS, right?
By the way, let me ask about Digital then, because obviously he was actually one of the big names at the time. Because actually, in this era, if you notice the storyline, because Finnish CS is still on the rise, if you're a really big name in Norway, Sweden, Finland, you try and get into the Swedish teams. They're the ones with the money. They're the ones with the status. And he was one of the people like myssE who was able to go, like you say, and play with other countries, etc. He was even in the Astralis team that was rivaling you guys. But eventually, he did join you guys in this team. Was it a big deal to have this player? I mean, like we're saying, there's not that many established players at the time, right?
Yeah, I mean, he was one of the few that was land proven. You knew what you got when you went to tournaments to play with him. It was quite in a typical. He was a Finnish Swedish guy, so his mother language was actually Swedish, and Finnish was his second language. He was basically native in Finnish as well, but his first language is Swedish. That's how he ended up in the Swedish teams. And he had a bit of an attitude on that guy for sure. But when he was behaving well and like he was feeling good, it was good to have that kind of drive that he had, and I always appreciated the drive. So it didn't bother me too much that he had a bit of an attitude, because I always, like I've said multiple times, I always had the drive to kind of like push as much as possible. but also very skilled. I think very diverse. He could play rifle. He could play op. He could IGL. Like he could do like he was jack of all trades, kind of a guy. But yeah, I mean, it was a no-brainer when we had the opportunity to have him to get him to the team.
Being as you were someone who you'd been to America, like you say, for the CyberX Games, but it basically never happened. When you got to go to this big CPL, and at the time CPLs were like, they were just considered, what we didn't say majors back then, we sort of treat them like majors. Was it a big deal to even get to go there and to see like the Hyatt ballroom and all the things you see from the photos and think like, I'm here, I'm actually playing the matches?
I think if I'm not mistaken, the first CPL I went to was in a resort and not at the Hyatt. I think it was the second CPL that was in the Hyatt.
Right.
I could be wrong, but this is what my memory tells me. It was the Gaylord Texan.
No, that's
resort.
later. That's a few years later. That's the next year, I think. I think
Maybe,
that was like
maybe.
2006, that one. You got it the wrong way around, I think. I think it was the Hyatt and then it was Gaylord later, yeah.
Yeah, it might be. You might be right. Or it could have also been like the alternator or something. And then the 2006 WSVGs were at this resort.
Right,
sure.
right.
But I have a feeling that they had one of the CPLs there too. But yeah, I could be wrong. Anywho, the Hyatt and also the Hyatt itself, the whole the venue in itself had already become like legendary to everyone that was into Counter-Strike through the videos that we would download and not watch on YouTube because YouTube was not a thing.
Yep.
So you download them like overnight because of low internet speeds and then watch it in the next morning. The reports that some of these companies were doing from the events, and you kind of already knew your way around the Hyatt just because of watching all these videos. But yeah, I mean, it was for sure like a legend. It would be fun to actually go there. I think it's still running, right? So a legendary venue.
If people don't know, if you ever see the Dallas Skyline, that big ball that looks like the NBA championship, it's basically that's the hotel. That's actually where we were at. Sadly, though, it looks way doper on the Skyline than it actually is inside.
Yeah, there's a lot of fun stories from that venue. I remember Manje Capra just randomly sneaking his way into rooms that no one had and pouring water on light bulbs to blow them up and like the most random shit. Like, don't ask me why. But I just have this memory in my head from one of the CPLs. I can't remember which one. I might have been in 4K at the time already. But yeah, no, for sure, legendary venue. It was like the pinnacle of Counter-Strike esports at the time. You know, if you think of Katowice, or if you think of the Lanxess Arena in a similar way, it was like the cathedral or the Mecca or whatever of Counter-Strike of its time.
When you went to this CPL, the summer one in 2004, you guys got to finish fourth. But if anyone ever looks, like, you had like a close game against the Titans, then you did this low bracket run, you lost to Rival, if the West Coast team, if people remember. So like, this was like also like, maybe you could have done better, maybe you could have done worse. It depends how things shake out. Because if people don't know back then, Natu, especially if you drop to the low bracket, it's not like now where you play one game a day. Like, you just keep playing. Like, if you drop the low bracket, you might sometimes play like 3 games that day. And that means, by the way, if you're really tired on that third game of jet lag, like tough shit. Like, that's why when people look back at these wikis, I always say the people who have the top placings weren't just good at the game, mate. They were just fucking good. Like, this was like hard conditions, wasn't it? So what was it like to play back then in tournaments like this?
And best of ones through and through. MR12 at the time, I believe.
Not even about veto. It was just based on the round of the tournament you were in. Yeah,
exactly. There was a CPL after this where we screwed up and not practiced a map because we were confident we would be passed. I think it was CPL Fire or something. It wasn't a map. It wasn't a map we played in Europe, so we just kind of went through, like, it was already like a big map pool. So we were thinking, okay, let's go through it like quickly, but not practice it or anything.
Oh yeah. By the way, as you say as well, it wasn't like it was just those maps. There was like Prodigy and fucking Aztec and shit like that in the map pool back then. It was ridiculous, wasn't it?
yeah. And then I think there was a couple rounds, especially if you had a low seed. There was a couple rounds in the early rounds where it was single elimination. So they just basically, there were teams that would be more like a hobby, kind of just a group of friends coming in. I believe we beat Sapphire, who's like an observer. I think she does Valorant nowadays. I think she's been talking to me about this a couple of times, that they lost to us in the first round of one of these CPLs, and then packed it up and basically went home now.
Well, you have to, two and done,
Yeah, and no, just one and done.
Oh, one and done, right? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, the first rounds were single LM. Yeah, so it was tough luck on the draw drove the luck in terms of seedings and whatnot. So because they were also not the best kind of seedings at the time, and on top of it, yeah, you never knew like if you had tough luck with the bracket and the matchup and the map and everything. I mean, yeah, I a lot of respect for the teams that went far in those tournaments for sure. On top of the fact, as you mentioned, having to play, I think at the worst case, I think if I'm not wrong, I think I've been in a CPL where we had to play 4 or 5 matches within a day. So we would start in the morning and then play all the way until like 10 in the evening. I think this was maybe the WSVG 2006 with 4 Kings where this happened. And I just remember that we just ran out of steam. Like we were just like, we just didn't have any energy whatsoever. So yeah, it was, let's just say the standards were a bit different. You know, nowadays there's different principles. You have to have a certain amount of a break and blah, 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 blah. And not in a million years. There's some tournaments still where you'd play like a best of 1 and the best of 3 if you lost the best of 1 opening round, right? Even in today's esports, but not in the way that those CPLs were ran back in the day.
Right. One of the things I would ask is this, is when back then, because as you say, there wasn't like Facebook, there was YouTube. Actually, if you were European, the only thing we knew about Americans was like you read some news or you can watch a demo or something like that. Or maybe like you could play a POG, like we say, you could go on ESEN. If there's another pro there, maybe you could play with them. But actually, people weren't super social until they came to these events. These events is where you might meet people or have a drink with someone or play in the BYOC. And then that's where you actually get to sort of like build network, almost like build relationship, get to know people, all right?
Yeah. I think one of the reasons why eventually, was it 2004 where the NOA lineup became a thing where it was Jaguar and Executor and those guys. I mean, I'm sure like the connection came through like late nights at the Hyatt Hotel, right? But I think, around those years, like 2004, we started also joining, what was it? Game Surge was maybe the name of the
IRC server, yes.
IRC network, where the Americans were. Jeez, where did I don't even remember how did I even remember that name? But yeah, we started hanging out there. They had these different clubs. I was part of one of the clubs. Maybe?
What was yours?
I think it was the 1G one, I think Summit has it still uses it. On its streams, right?
True.
To this day, right? So we used to play like, for me, obviously, middle of the night, like scrims and pogs together and things of that nature. And and it all started at the CPLs. I was always a social type of a guy, so I got to know quite a few people. I hung out with most of them. What was one of the guys' name? Was it Haynes or?
Yeah, one from Rival. Exodus,
yeah,
maybe?
From Rival.
Exodus?
No.
He was the kind of happy guy, like a big chubby guy, if you know what I mean.
I remember him. Yeah, I mean, those guys were a lot of fun to hang out with. We played poker, we did a lot of stuff, and like had all these laid out hangouts with like there's a certain group of Americans and European guys that would typically hang out at this. So it was like going to like this international. What would you call it? Like
summer camp or something.
Yeah, exactly. You know, with like-minded kids, you know, who loved Counter-Strike, and we were competing there. We never got to see each other because we were for different continents, and then all of a sudden we were all ramped into the same hotel. You know, so it was great fun.
So as you referenced, a weird part that I can now ask about, because I then can insert myself in this story to give you a unique perspective, is after this CPL, a few months later, I actually lived with you for like 2 months or something in Lahti, right? And at the time I was there, you went to one of these events. You went to this event at the time it was called Czech Republic. They call it Czechia now, I believe you're supposed to say. So you went to this event in Czech Republic. Again, another one of these tournaments. It was the one called Invex Euro Cyber Cup. And it's another one where it's like, if you win, you get 10K. And at the time, because of what you'd done already, I was thinking like, right, what you're going to do is go there. You're going to come first or second. You get some cash. You come back. You got some money then, you know. And then I remember watching it online while you were there. I woke up and watched it. And first of all, right, this tournament actually had even less famous teams in. But it had the Poles, Neo and Taz, right? And at the time, their lineup was like, I think they already had Luke, so they were still 2 away from the Golden 5. But look, Neo's Neo, mate. Like, if you know how good he was back then. So, but at the time, everyone thinks you're supposed to just easily walk this event. So I saw in the group stage you lost them. I already remember thinking, maybe it was like bad PCs or something. They lost to the fucking Polish team. And then in the semi-finals, you lost to Advanced Online Losers, which was like an all-right German team. But to be fair, if I look now, they did have Capio. So like very shortly after that, he became an amazing player. But I remember when he came home going like, how did he come third? Like, what happened? Like, this must have been a shock. Because, I mean, what's cool in this scenario is, like, you're one of the people who kind of got the early glimpse of what people like Neo and Taz were like, right?
Yeah. Tough to play against. And Neo, I think, mechanically speaking, probably the best ever to play 1.6 or the original CS series. And super tough to play against. I remember Pistols especially, like, poof. It wasn't a lot of fun to play against his USB. But yeah, I don't remember too much about that event, apart from the fact that we went there thinking, looking at the lineup of teams, and like you said, like, yeah, it's gonna be easy, whatever, 5K, 10K or something, and then we'll have a good time after. But didn't end up being that way.
Because after this, you went to the latter CPL at the end of the year. And for this one, obviously, you were fourth at last one. You were one of the hyped teams. Like, this is another chance to do something big. But this is when you made the dreaded move, which is another classic Finnish scene move, which is never just stay with the good lineup, guys. Why would you do that? What you've got to do, you always have to ruthlessly pick apart your rival team. So what happened was, T-Hop and Guardian, not the one from fucking Slovakia, he nicked his name too, by the way. There was a Finnish player called Guardian. Those two players, because they were good in Astralis or whatever, they came over. You sort of made the super team, like, oh, I've got all the best players now. But the only problem is, wasn't as good, right? So they were still a good team, but this team wasn't as good, was it?
No. I can't remember the exact, like, how it went, the whole change. But I do think there were a couple of guys. Actually, even I was considering, like, do I want to, like,
you thought about retiring or leave or something, right?
Yeah, at the time. And then I think Tico beat me to the punch, and he was like, yeah, I'm out. Oh, okay. So I think that kind of what started the snowball effect of it. And then I think we removed Alpha as well, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so, yes.
And then, like you said, got Guardian and then T-Hop in the team. I mean, on paper, of course, like, that was a great lineup, but like we've learned throughout the history of Counter-Strike, what looks good on paper doesn't necessarily mean it in reality. I mean, even in a world where now you think of all these different roles in CS, but roles were vaguely a thing at the time. You had an Opera, you had an IGL, but then the rest of it was just like, you have 3 riflers, right? Now you have different profiles of riflers that you want to combine with one another. And I mean, obviously, we didn't just mesh well together, it didn't work out whatsoever compared to what we had previously. Because I think it was also the fact that with the previous lineup, we had been going to all these tournaments. We had so much experience together. You already knew, like, from the back, without communicating, you already kind of knew what the other player was going to do, right? And then you lose much of that when you change to players, didn't go too well.
As you say, the elimination match was actually, funnily enough, against cArn's Big Rip team, and it was on fire, the map you don't play, so who cares about that one? But it was actually the upper bracket game I want to ask about. The upper bracket game, you lost to Complexity, right? But people have to know, this was the tournament where Complexity became good. Before that, they were literally a joke, and even the players they had, aside from Bullseye from 3D, the rest of them, even people like Fraud, people won't realise this, were actually sort of like, they hadn't made it yet. They were kind of misfits, they'd been in this team, and then that team, and then you just put a few of them together. And so it was actually this run that made Call legendary. If people don't remember that famous one where there was like even like a little mini movie they made about this or something, this was the tournament that they did it at, the Redemption or whatever the fuck it was called, that documentary. Like, so you were one of the victims, unfortunately, of this team, because no one could really know this team was going to be good, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think we all heard the stories of Jason Lake gifting Bullseye like a Harley Davidson or something to get him signed to Complexity, like, which
is cool, to be fair, but it sounded ridiculous at the time. Sure.
Yeah, I think that was like the first headline I ever read about Complexity back in the day. So you were like, yeah, like, what is this? What is this going to be? And then we lost to them. It was on Nuke, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. A very technical map, even back in those days, and I think that's one of the where you could see that we just didn't connect as well as a team compared to the previous lineup, because Nuke was one of our bread and butter maps with the original Destination Skyline 5. But I don't remember all too much about that game. I just remember us being let's say, just shocked. Like, how did we lose this? And then looking at the bracket after, like, oh shit, now we're gonna have to play Fire in the low bracket, right?
After this, Destination Skyline broke up. The team went away, and you ended up joining Astralis and like a different mix of players there. Obviously, I'm asking a big question here, but do you remember why did Destination Skyline go away, or why the sponsor went away? Why did you end up doing this?
Classic scam story, right? The guy who was running Destination Skyline just pocketed like money from the sponsors we had, right? And then he even threatened me as well when I was contemplating leaving to Astralis. Like, he was making threats to me if I leave. I can't remember what exactly he said. But I remember just being scared, because he was this older, very tall guy. Didn't really knew him, but you know what I mean, like not really knowing him as well. He was just the guy who was fixing our plane tickets basically, and we saw him a few times of the year. But yeah, that was basically what happened. That things were not looking good, and I felt like it was time to make a change. And the Astralis guys were struggling with LAN, and they knew with me they will get a player that will perform on LAN. So that's why I decided to make the move.
Everyone needs a support network, and mine is, of course, my Patreon community, the Scrominati, who in many ways, they're the Sonny to my Cher, saying, I got you, babe. So this video and all the others on my channel were kindly supported by the following names: Ahmed Haju, Mac Pugnaccio Rakula, Adam Tomlin, Animosity, Jensen Go, Tosh, Toucan, and you know it. Jerky's Minion, my main man, always going to be referenced, one of the best patrons of all time. Would you like to ask a question in my AMA? Maybe you want to suggest a topic or a guest to say on my channel? Do you want teasers, find out who the upcoming Reflections and Talk to Thorin interviews are? Maybe you want to do one of those long discussions where you get to set the topics we talk about. Well, if any of these or others appeal to you, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Scluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.